Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming corridors of the Imperial Medical Academy, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished crystal floors. The towering spires of the academy stretched impossibly high above him, their walls lined with holographic displays showing the greatest medical achievements of the Draconian Empire. Students and faculty moved past him like he was invisible, their scales shimmering under the artificial sunlight that streamed through the transparent dome overhead. He had been working here for 3 Earth years now, ever since humanity had been granted the dubious honor of serving the galactic community as maintenance staff and laborers. The Draconians, with their proud heritage and ancient bloodlines, considered humans barely sentient. To them, Marcus was just another piece of cleaning equipment that happened to walk on 2 legs. The morning started like any other. Marcus emptied waste receptacles filled with discarded medical samples, mopped floors that gleamed like mirrors, and replaced air filtration units that hummed with technology beyond human comprehension. The Draconian students barely glanced at him as they discussed complex surgical procedures and debated the finer points of xenobiology. Their voices carried the musical quality typical of their species, like wind chimes made of crystal. It was during his lunch break that everything changed. Marcus sat in the service corridor eating his standard-issue protein bar when he heard something that made him pause. Through the ventilation grate above his head came the sound of labored breathing, followed by a soft thud. He climbed the maintenance ladder and peered through the grate into one of the private study rooms. What he saw made his blood run cold. A young Draconian male, no more than 20 in human years, lay collapsed on the floor. His scales, which should have been a brilliant emerald green, had turned an alarming shade of gray. Foam flecked with golden blood bubbled from his mouth, and his breathing came in short, desperate gasps. Marcus recognized the symptoms immediately. During his brief stint in human emergency medical services before the galactic integration, he had seen similar cases. The gray discoloration, the bloody foam, the shallow breathing, all classic signs of acute poisoning, possibly from heavy metal contamination. Without thinking, Marcus kicked open the grate and dropped into the room. The young Draconian's eyes were barely open, but they widened in surprise when they saw a human kneeling beside him. "Don't try to talk," Marcus said, gently turning the student onto his side to clear his airway. "You've been poisoned. I need to get you help." The Draconian tried to speak, but only more bloody foam emerged. His hands, tipped with retractable claws, clutched weakly at Marcus's uniform. There was desperation in his golden eyes, a plea for help that transcended species boundaries. Marcus looked around the study room frantically. The walls were lined with medical texts and holographic displays showing complex molecular structures. On the desk sat several containers, one still open, its contents spilled across expensive learning materials. The acrid smell that rose from the spill confirmed his suspicions. Someone had tampered with the students' study materials, coating them with a substance that would be absorbed through the skin. "This wasn't an accident," Marcus muttered. "Someone tried to kill you." He activated his maintenance communicator but stopped before sending the emergency signal. In the 3 years he had worked here, Marcus had learned how the Draconian hierarchy functioned. Medical emergencies involving students were handled by the Academy's internal system. They would send a medical team, but only after proper protocols were followed. Forms would need to be filled out, authorizations obtained, and senior staff notified. By the time help arrived, this student would be dead. The human emergency medical training kicked in. Marcus scooped the dying Draconian into his arms, surprised by how light he was despite his height. Draconian bones were hollow, like those of earth birds, an evolutionary adaptation from their species' early days as aerial predators. The student's head lolled against Marcus's shoulder, and he could feel the young alien's heart beating rapidly against his chest. Marcus burst through the study room door and into the main corridor, ignoring the startled gasps and angry hisses from the draconian students and faculty he passed. Several tried to block his path, their crests flaring in indignation at seeing a human carrying one of their own. "Get out of my way!" Marcus shouted, pushing past a group of senior students. "He's dying!" "Put him down immediately, human," commanded Professor Vexithera, her serpentine neck extending to its full height. Her scales were a deep purple that marked her as nobility. "You have no authority to touch a student of this academy." "He'll be dead in 5 minutes if I don't get him to the emergency medical bay," Marcus replied, not slowing his pace. "Look at him. The gray discoloration, the bloody foam. It's heavy metal poisoning, probably thallium or mercury compound." Professor Vexithera's eyes widened slightly. She was a toxicology expert and recognized the symptoms Marcus described, but her pride as a draconian wouldn't allow her to admit that a human might be right about a medical diagnosis. "The proper protocol is to contact the medical emergency team through official channels," she insisted, moving to block Marcus's path. "Set him down, and we will handle this appropriately." "Your protocols will kill him," Marcus said bluntly. "I've seen this before. He has maybe 3 minutes left before his nervous system shuts down completely." The debate might have continued, but the student in Marcus's arms suddenly convulsed violently, his back arching as every muscle in his body contracted. Golden blood sprayed from his mouth, splattering across the crystal floor. Several onlookers stepped back in horror. That was when Marcus noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Around the dying student's neck, partially hidden by his convulsions, was a pendant he had only seen in historical broadcasts. It bore the symbol of the imperial family, a dragon with wings spread wide, crafted from rare metals that seemed to shift color in the light. This wasn't just any student. This was Prince Zeftar, heir to the dragon throne, third in line to rule an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the prince died here, while in his arms, the political ramifications would be catastrophic. Humans were barely tolerated in galactic society as it was. If they were blamed for the death of draconian royalty, it could mean the end of human participation in galactic civilization. But even more than that, Marcus couldn't stand by and watch anyone die when he might be able to help. "Move!" he roared, charging past the stunned professor. "I don't care if he's a prince or a pauper. He's dying, and I'm not going to let that happen on my watch." The emergency medical bay was 3 levels down and halfway across the academy complex. Marcus ran through corridors he had cleaned 1,000 times, his feet automatically taking the most direct route. Behind him, he could hear the sound of pursuit. Security forces, no doubt, coming to stop the insane human who had dared to lay hands on royalty. Prince Zeftar's breathing was becoming more shallow with each passing second. His scales were now almost completely gray, and his body temperature was dropping rapidly. Marcus could feel the young alien's life slipping away. "Stay with me," Marcus whispered as he ran. "Don't you dare die on me now. I didn't risk my career and probably my life just to watch you give up." The prince's golden eyes flickered open for a moment, focusing on Marcus's face with surprising clarity. His lips moved, forming words that came out as barely a whisper. "Why?" he managed to ask. "Why help me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Because every life has value, regardless of species or station." Something shifted in the prince's expression. For a moment, the pain seemed to recede, replaced by a look of wonder. In his entire life, surrounded by courtiers and sycophants who valued him only for his title, no one had ever risked anything for him simply because it was right. "Thank you," he whispered, and then his eyes closed again. Marcus burst through the doors of the emergency medical bay, startling the draconian medical staff. They looked up from their various tasks, their expressions ranging from confusion to outrage at seeing a human burst into their sterile environment. "I need help!" Marcus shouted. "Heavy metal poisoning, probably thallium. He's been exposed for at least 20 minutes. Respiratory distress, cardiac arrhythmia, and neurological symptoms." Dr. Kesara, the chief emergency physician, rose from her desk with an expression of cold fury. Her scales were silver with age, and her medical credentials were among the most impressive in the Empire. "How dare you bring your contamination into my medical bay?" she hissed. "Security!" "Look at him," Marcus pleaded, setting the prince gently on the nearest examination table. "Look at his symptoms and tell me I'm wrong." For a moment, Dr. Kesara's professional instincts warred with her species' prejudice. Then she saw the gray discoloration of the patient's scales, the bloody foam, the shallow breathing. Her expression changed instantly from anger to focused medical concentration. "Nurse Veltani, initiate emergency protocol 7, she commanded, rushing to the examination table. "Get me a full toxicology workup and prepare the collation chamber." As the medical team sprang into action around the dying prince, Marcus stepped back against the wall, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. Through the transparent doors of the medical bay, he could see security forces gathering, their energy weapons already drawn. Dr. Kesara worked with swift efficiency, her hands dancing over holographic displays that showed the prince's vital signs. The readings were grim, his nervous system was shutting down, his heart was struggling to maintain rhythm, and his blood chemistry was completely disrupted. "It is indeed heavy metal poisoning," she confirmed, not looking at Marcus. "Thallium compound, administered through dermal contact, very sophisticated, very deadly." She paused in her work and turned to face Marcus directly. "How did you know?" she asked. "Draconian physiology is completely different from human. Our symptoms should mean nothing to you." "Poisons work the same way across most carbon-based life forms," Marcus replied. "The symptoms might manifest differently, but the basic progression is similar. I've seen thallium poisoning in humans before." "You are medically trained?" "I was an emergency medical technician before the integration. Not a doctor, just someone who knew enough to keep people alive until real help could arrive." Dr. Kesara studied him with new interest. "Your diagnosis was correct. If you had not brought him here when you did, Prince Zeftar would have died within minutes." The words hung in the air between them. Around the medical bay, the other staff members had frozen in their tasks, suddenly realizing the identity of their patient. The political implications of what had just occurred were staggering. "Prince Zeftar?" Nurse Veltani whispered. "The heir to the dragon throne?" "The same," Dr. Kesara confirmed grimly. "And he was nearly murdered while under the protection of our most prestigious academy." The security forces were now pressed against the transparent doors, waiting for orders. Marcus could see the conflict in their eyes. They wanted to arrest him for his unprecedented breach of protocol, but he had also just saved the life of their future emperor. "The chelation chamber is ready," announced another nurse, "but his condition is still critical. The poison has been in his system too long." Dr. Kesara's expression was grave as she reviewed the prince's vital signs. "We can remove the toxin from his blood, but there may be permanent damage. The next few hours will be crucial." She turned to Marcus again. "You saved his life, human. Without your quick thinking and your willingness to ignore our protocols, Prince Zeftar would be dead." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus replied quietly. "No," Dr. Kesara said firmly. "What anyone would do is follow proper channels and procedures. What you did was something else entirely. You saw someone in need and acted without thought for the consequences to yourself." The prince was being moved into the collation chamber, a sophisticated device that would slowly remove the toxins from his bloodstream while supporting his vital functions. As the medical team worked around him, his golden eyes opened one more time, searching until they found Marcus. With tremendous effort, he raised one hand and pressed it against the glass of the chamber. Marcus approached and placed his own hand against the glass, palm to palm with the prince. "Thank you," the prince mouthed silently. "Just get better," Marcus replied. As the chelation process began, the medical bay doors slid open and the security forces entered. Their leader, Captain Mordak, was a massive draconian whose black scales marked him as military nobility. His expression was unreadable as he approached Marcus. "You are under arrest for assault upon a royal person, violation of Academy protocols and breach of security," he announced formally. "You will come with us for questioning." Marcus nodded, understanding that this had always been inevitable. He had known the moment he picked up the prince that his life as he knew it was over. Whether he would be executed, imprisoned, or simply exiled back to Earth, he didn't know. But as he was led away from the medical bay, Marcus felt no regret. Through the transparent walls, he could see the chelation chamber working to save Prince Zeftar's life. The gray was already beginning to fade from the prince's scales, replaced by the healthy emerald green of his species. The prince would live. Whatever happened to Marcus now, that single fact made everything worthwhile. Behind him, Dr. Kesara watched the human being led away by security. In her long medical career, she had seen many acts of heroism and selflessness. But what she had witnessed today was something different. The human had risked everything for someone he barely knew, someone whose species had treated his own as little more than intelligent animals. As she turned back to monitoring her patient, Dr. Kesara found herself wondering if perhaps the galactic community had been wrong about humans. Perhaps there was more to them than anyone had realized. In the chelation chamber, Prince Zeftar's vital signs continued to improve. But even as his body healed from the poison, his mind was focused on something else entirely. The image of a human janitor risking everything to save his life was burned into his memory. For the first time in his sheltered existence, he had encountered true courage and compassion, and it had come from the most unlikely source imaginable, a member of the species his people considered barely worthy of notice. As consciousness faded and the medical equipment took over the task of keeping him alive, Prince Zeftar made a silent vow. When he recovered, things would change. The human who had saved his life would be rewarded, and perhaps it was time for the Draconian Empire to reconsider its treatment of humanity. But first, he had to survive. And thanks to a janitor named Marcus Chen, he would. Marcus sat in the detention cell, staring at walls made of some crystalline material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 3 days had passed since he carried Prince Zeftar to the medical bay, and in that time, he had been questioned by everyone from Academy security to Imperial intelligence officers. Each interrogation followed the same pattern: disbelief that a human could have correctly diagnosed draconian poisoning symptoms, followed by suspicion that he might have been involved in the assassination attempt. The cell was comfortable enough by human standards, with a sleeping platform that adjusted to his body temperature and a food synthesizer that produced meals tailored to human nutrition. But comfort couldn't ease the weight of uncertainty that pressed down on him. Through the transparent wall of his cell, Marcus could see other detention areas, most of them empty. The Draconians didn't believe in long-term imprisonment. Their justice was swift and usually final. On the morning of the 4th day, the cell door dissolved into particles of light, revealing 2 figures Marcus had not expected to see. Dr. Kesara stood beside a Draconian he didn't recognize, though the intricate gold threading in her scales and the ceremonial armor she wore marked her as someone of enormous importance. "Marcus Chen," Dr. Kesara said formally. I present General Sixandra, Supreme Commander of Imperial Security and aunt to Prince Zeftar. Marcus stood quickly, uncertain of the proper protocol. General Sixandra was smaller than most Draconians he had encountered, but there was something in her posture and the way she carried herself that spoke of absolute authority. Her scales were a deep bronze color, almost metallic, and her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to dissect everything she looked at. "So you are the human who has caused such confusion in our empire," she said, her voice carrying the musical tones of her species, but with an underlying steel. "Do you know what you have done?" "I saved someone's life," Marcus replied simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Nothing more?" General Sixandra moved closer, her height allowing her to look down at Marcus even when he stood straight. "You violated numerous imperial laws, ignored centuries of protocol, and physically handled a member of the royal family without permission. In most circumstances, these actions would result in immediate execution." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "And I'd do it again. Laws and protocols mean nothing when someone is dying." Something flickered in the general's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Dr. Kesa'ara tells me that my nephew would have died without your intervention. Is this true?" "The prince was in the final stages of thallium poisoning," Dr. Kesa'ara interjected. "Perhaps 2 or 3 minutes from complete neurological failure. The human's rapid response and correct diagnosis saved his life." "And you are certain this human was not involved in the poisoning itself?" "Completely certain. The poison was applied to study materials in Prince Zeftar's private study room. Security recordings show that Marcus Chen was in entirely different sections of the academy when this occurred. Moreover, if he had been involved, he would hardly have drawn attention to himself by carrying the prince through the corridors." General Sixandra circled Marcus slowly, her predatory gaze taking in every detail. "Tell me, human, what do you know of our political situation?" "Very little," Marcus admitted. "Humans aren't exactly included in imperial politics. Prince Zeftar has 2 older brothers," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Prince Morgan and Prince Velthor. Both are considered more suitable heirs to the throne by various court factions. Zeftar has always been seen as too gentle, too interested in academic pursuits rather than military conquest." Marcus remained silent, sensing that he was being told something important but not understanding why. "What you may not know," the general continued, "is that there have been 3 previous attempts on my nephew's life, all made to look like accidents. A gravitational field malfunction during flight training, contaminated food that caused severe allergic reactions. And now this, sophisticated chemical poisoning disguised as a laboratory accident." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone in the royal family is trying to kill him. Someone with access to the palace, knowledge of his routines, and the resources to obtain exotic poisons, General Sixandra confirmed. Someone who would benefit greatly from his death. "Why are you telling me this?" The general stopped her circling and faced him directly. "Because my nephew has made a request that has shocked the entire imperial court. He wants you to become his personal bodyguard." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "That's impossible. I'm human. I don't have any security training. I'm a janitor." "You are also the only person in the Empire who has shown the courage to risk everything for his life," Dr. Kesa'ara pointed out. "More importantly, you are the only person he trusts." "The Imperial Council is in an uproar," General Sixandra continued. "The idea of a human serving as bodyguard to a royal prince is unprecedented. Many consider it an insult to our entire species. But Zeftar has made his wishes clear, and he is technically still an heir to the throne." Marcus shook his head. "I can't do this. I don't know the first thing about protecting someone. especially from the kind of sophisticated threats you're describing. Which is why you would not be acting alone, the general said. I have selected a team of my most trusted security specialists to work with you. They would handle the technical aspects of protection while you serve as the prince's constant companion, the one person he believes he can trust absolutely. But why me? He doesn't even know me. Dr. Kessara stepped forward. When Prince Zeftar regained consciousness, the first thing he asked for was to see the human who had saved him. When I told him you had been arrested, he became so agitated that his vital signs became dangerous. He has refused all other protection, claiming that if the Empire cannot trust someone who risked everything to save his life, then the Empire itself cannot be trusted. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. What exactly would this involve? You would live in the palace, General Sixandra explained. You would accompany the prince to all his activities, public and private. You would learn to recognize threats, both obvious and subtle. Most importantly, you would be his eyes and ears among people who might not suspect a human of understanding what they see and hear. There is another consideration, Dr. Kessara added quietly. The poison used in this assassination attempt had one unusual characteristic. It was designed specifically for draconian physiology. No other species in the Empire would have been affected by it in the same way. Meaning that as a human you are uniquely immune to many of the methods that might be used against the prince. Biological weapons, neural disruptors, pheromone-based toxins, none of these would work on your alien biology. Marcus began to understand the deeper reasoning behind the prince's request. It wasn't just about trust. It was about the practical advantage of having a protector who couldn't be easily eliminated by the same methods used against draconians. If I agree to this, Marcus said slowly, what happens to my life? My job? My status as a human citizen? Your status would change dramatically, General Sixandra admitted. You would become a member of the royal household with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. You would have access to imperial technology, advanced training, and resources beyond anything humans have experienced. But you would also become a target yourself. The moment you accept this position, Dr. Kessara added, you become a threat to whoever is trying to kill Prince Zeftar. They will not hesitate to eliminate you as well. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had been told. Through the transparent wall of the detention cell, he could see the vast cityscape of the draconian capital spreading out below the facility. Millions of beings going about their daily lives, most of them completely unaware that the future of their empire might depend on the decision of a human janitor. Can I see him? Marcus asked finally. Can I talk to the prince before I make my decision? General Sixandra exchanged a glance with Dr. Kessara. He has been asking to see you as well, but I must warn you. His recovery has been complicated by more than just the physical effects of the poison. What do you mean? The assassination attempt has shattered something inside him, Dr. Kessara explained gently. For his entire life, Prince Zeftar has been surrounded by people who claimed to love and protect him. To discover that one of them may want him dead has affected him deeply. He trusts no one now except you. They transported Marcus to the medical facility in an unmarked security vehicle that moved through the sky with silent efficiency. The draconian capital was a marvel of architecture and engineering, with buildings that seemed to grow from crystalline foundations and transport tubes that carried citizens through the air in streams of controlled energy. But Marcus barely noticed the wonders around him, his mind focused on the conversation ahead. The Imperial Medical Facility was nothing like the academy where Marcus had worked. Everything here spoke of wealth and power beyond human comprehension. The walls were lined with rare metals that changed color as they passed, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with embedded technology. Prince Zeftar's room was a combination of medical bay and luxury suite, with equipment that monitored his vital signs hidden seamlessly within furnishings that probably cost more than most human colonies. The prince himself sat by a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the Imperial Palace complex, his emerald scales fully restored to their healthy brilliance. When he saw Marcus enter, relief flooded his features. "They told me you had been arrested. I feared the worst." "I'm fine," Marcus assured him. "How are you feeling?" "Physically, I have recovered completely. Dr. Kesara tells me that there should be no lasting effects from the poison." The prince's expression darkened. "But in other ways, I am not sure I will ever be the same." Marcus sat in the chair beside the prince's bed, noting how the young Draconian seemed more relaxed with him present. "Your aunt told me about the previous attempts on your life." "I thought they were accidents," Prince Zeftar said quietly. "I believed that the universe was simply testing my worthiness to rule. It never occurred to me that someone close to me, someone I trusted, was actively trying to end my life." "Do you have any idea who it might be?" The prince was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes fixed on something beyond the window. "There are many possibilities. Court officials who believe one of my brothers would be a better emperor. Military commanders who think I am too weak to lead during wartime. Even members of my own family who might benefit from my death. That's a heavy burden to carry, which is why I need someone I can trust absolutely." Prince Zeftar turned to face Marcus directly. "I know what I am asking of you. I know how strange it must seem for a prince to request a human bodyguard, but you are the only person who has ever risked everything for me without expecting anything in return." Marcus studied the young prince's face, seeing vulnerability there that probably few others had ever witnessed. "Why is this so important to you? You barely know me. Because in the moment when I was dying, when I was completely helpless and defenseless, you didn't see a prince or a draconian or a member of a species that has mistreated yours. You saw someone who needed help, and you provided it without hesitation." The prince's voice grew stronger. "That is the kind of person I want beside me. That is the kind of loyalty I need if I am going to survive long enough to change things." "Change things how?" Prince Zeftar stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent material. "The Empire is built on the assumption that Draconians are superior to all other species. We rule through fear and subjugation, taking what we want and giving nothing back. But what if we're wrong? What if true strength comes from cooperation rather than domination?" Marcus joined him at the window. "That's a dangerous philosophy for a future emperor. Which is probably why someone is trying to kill me." The prince replied with bitter humor. "My brothers embrace the traditional ways. They see conquest and expansion as the natural order of things. But I have studied the histories of other species, including yours. I know what humans are capable of when they work together rather than against each other." "And you think that applies to the Empire as a whole?" "I think the Empire is dying," Prince Zeftar said bluntly. "We have grown so large that we can no longer effectively control our territory. We have made so many enemies that we spend more resources fighting rebellions than we gain from conquest. And we have become so dependent on subject species for labor and resources that our own people have grown soft and complacent." The prince turned to face Marcus again. "But what if instead of subjects we had partners? What if instead of fear we inspired loyalty? What if the Empire became something that other species wanted to join rather than something they submitted to?" Marcus was beginning to understand why someone might want this prince dead. His vision threatened the entire foundation of Draconian society. "Those are revolutionary ideas." "Revolutionary enough to get me killed, apparently." Prince Zeftar smiled sadly. "Which is why I need someone beside me who believes that change is possible. Someone who has already proven that species barriers can be overcome." "I'm not a revolutionary," Marcus protested. I'm just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. You saved my life at great personal risk, and when offered the chance to escape the consequences, you chose to face them instead, the prince countered. You may not see yourself as a revolutionary, but you have already proven that you are willing to act on your principles regardless of the cost. Marcus looked out at the Imperial Palace complex, its spires reaching toward the sky like crystalline fingers. Somewhere in those buildings were people who wanted the prince dead, people who would see Marcus as nothing more than another obstacle to remove. But he also remembered the feeling of the prince's life slipping away in his arms, and the determination that had driven him to save someone he barely knew. "If I do this," Marcus said slowly, "I want some conditions." "Name them." "First, I want to know everything about these previous assassination attempts. Every detail, every suspicion, every theory. If I'm going to protect you, I need to understand what we're facing." "Agreed." "Second, I want access to human resources. If someone is coming after me because of this, I want my people to know what's happening and why." Prince Zeftar nodded thoughtfully. "That could be arranged, though it might complicate matters politically." "And third," Marcus continued, "I want your promise that if I think you're in immediate danger, you'll follow my instructions without question. I don't care about protocol or royal dignity. If I tell you to run, you run. Even if it means abandoning important duties or embarrassing the royal family. Especially then. A living prince who occasionally embarrasses his family is better than a dead martyr." Prince Zeftar was quiet for a moment, then smiled. The first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "You know, I think this partnership might work. You are exactly the kind of person I hoped you would be." "Don't get too excited," Marcus warned. "I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to make mistakes, probably big ones." "We'll make them together," the prince replied, "and hopefully we'll both live long enough to learn from them." As they shook hands, an awkward gesture that required Marcus to explain the human custom, neither of them realized they were being watched from a hidden observation room deep within the medical facility. General Sixandra studied the interaction between her nephew and the human with professional interest. Around her, intelligence officers monitored every word, every gesture, every biometric reading from both participants. "What do you think?" she asked her chief intelligence officer, Colonel Nexthar. "The human is sincere," he reported. No deception detected in his voice patterns or body language. His commitment appears genuine. "And my nephew?" "Equally sincere. More importantly, his stress indicators have dropped to normal levels for the first time since the poisoning. The human's presence has a measurably positive effect on his psychological state." General Sixandra nodded thoughtfully. "Begin preparations for integration into the royal household. Full security protocols, but make it as seamless as possible. And Colonel?" "Yes, General?" "Start investigating everyone with access to the prince's schedule and location during the previous assassination attempts. Someone close to the royal family is a traitor, and when we find them, I want to be ready." As the general left the observation room, her mind was already working through the implications of what she had just witnessed. A human bodyguard for a draconian prince was unprecedented, possibly scandalous, and definitely dangerous. But as she had learned in decades of military service, sometimes the most unconventional solutions were exactly what a desperate situation required. And the Empire was growing more desperate by the day. 2 months after becoming Prince Zeftar's bodyguard, Marcus had learned to navigate the impossible complexity of Imperial Palace life. The corridors that had once seemed like crystalline mazes now held familiar patterns, and he could recognize court officials by their walking patterns and the subtle differences in their scale coloration. But more importantly, he had begun to understand the web of intrigue that surrounded the prince. The morning started like many others, with Marcus reviewing security reports while Prince Zeftar attended his daily tutorials in imperial history and governance. The prince's chambers had been modified to accommodate human needs, with furniture sized appropriately and atmospheric controls adjusted for optimal human comfort. It was a small gesture that spoke volumes about how seriously the royal family was taking Marcus's presence. "We have a problem," announced Captain Kexvar, the draconian security specialist who served as Marcus's primary liaison with the official protection detail. His scales were a military gray, and his manner was perpetually formal, though Marcus had detected hints of grudging respect in recent weeks. "What kind of problem?" Marcus asked, looking up from the reports. "Prince Morgan has requested a private meeting with Prince Zeftar. No security detail, no witnesses, just the two brothers." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Prince Morgan, the eldest of the three brothers and primary heir to the throne, had been conspicuously absent from court functions since the assassination attempt. According to intelligence reports, he had been conducting military exercises on the Outer Rim, supposedly preparing for potential conflicts with rebellious systems. "That's not happening," Marcus said flatly. "Not without security present." "The request comes with the full authority of the Crown Prince," Captain Kexavar replied uncomfortably. "Prince Zeftar is technically obligated to comply." "Then we'll make sure he's not alone." Marcus activated the communication system that connected him to Prince Zeftar's tutorial chamber. The prince's image appeared on the holographic display, his emerald scales bright under the artificial lighting. "Marcus, is something wrong?" "Your brother wants a private meeting. No security, no witnesses. How do you feel about that?" Prince Zeftar's expression darkened. "Morgan has barely spoken to me since the poisoning incident. Why would he want privacy now?" "That's exactly what worries me. Can you refuse?" "Not without creating a diplomatic incident. Morgan outranks me in the succession, and family meetings are considered sacred in our culture." The prince paused thoughtfully. "But there might be another way." An hour later, Marcus found himself crouched in a maintenance shaft that ran alongside the ornate chamber where the two princes would meet. The space was cramped even by human standards, filled with the humming machinery that maintained the palace's complex environmental systems. Through a nearly invisible grating, he had a clear view of the meeting room. The chamber itself was a marvel of draconian artistry, with walls that seemed to be carved from single pieces of colored crystal. Light flowed through them in patterns that shifted like aurora, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly beauty. Two chairs faced each other across a low table, designed for intimate conversation between equals. Prince Zeftar entered first, his posture formal but alert. Marcus noted the slight tension in his movements, the way his eyes swept the room for potential threats. The weeks of security training had paid off. The prince was no longer the naive academic who had nearly been killed by a poisoned study guide. Prince Morgan arrived precisely on schedule, and Marcus felt his breath catch. He had seen images of the crown prince, but seeing him in person was different. Where Zeftar was elegant and scholarly, Morgan was built for war. His scales were darker, almost black with hints of deep red, and his physical presence filled the room. Even his movements spoke of contained violence, like a predator temporarily at rest. "Brother," Morgan said formally as he took his seat, "you look well. I am pleased that you recovered so completely from your accident." "Thank you for your concern," Zeftar replied carefully. "Though I must say, your timing is interesting. You return from military exercises just as I begin to recover." Morgan's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Are you suggesting something, little brother?" "I am merely noting coincidences." Zeftar leaned back in his chair, projecting a confidence that Marcus knew he didn't entirely feel. "Though I have been wondering about many things lately. For instance, how a sophisticated poison specifically designed for draconian physiology found its way into a supposedly secure study chamber. "The palace has many enemies," Morgan replied smoothly. "Foreign agents, rebel sympathizers, disgruntled former subjects. Any of them might have infiltrated our security. True, but they would have needed detailed knowledge of my daily routine, my study habits, even my preferred learning materials." Zeftar's golden eyes fixed on his brother's face. "The kind of knowledge that comes from within the family." Marcus tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the emergency communicator that would summon backup security. The conversation was moving into dangerous territory. "You think someone in our family tried to kill you?" Morgan asked, his tone deceptively calm. "I think someone who knows me very well wanted me to appear weak and vulnerable. Perhaps someone who believed that my survival would be inconvenient for the Empire's future." Morgan was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying his younger brother. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, colder, more calculating. "Do you know what Father said when he heard about your human bodyguard? I assume he was displeased. He said that if you had so little faith in draconian security that you needed to rely on an alien, then perhaps you were not worthy of protection at all." Morgan leaned forward slightly. "He said that a true prince would either defend himself or die with dignity." "And what do you think, brother?" "I think," Morgan said slowly, "that you have always been too sentimental for your own good. This attachment to inferior species, this belief that all life has equal value, these are weaknesses that could destroy the Empire." Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized where this conversation was heading. Through the grating, he could see Morgan's hand moving to something concealed within his ceremonial robes. "Perhaps," Morgan continued, "it would be better for everyone if your particular brand of weakness was removed from the succession entirely." The Crown Prince's hand emerged holding a small device that Marcus didn't recognize. It was crystalline, like much draconian technology, but it pulsed with an inner light that spoke of enormous energy contained in a tiny space. "Neural disruptor," Zeftar said with surprising calm. "Designed to appear like a natural brain aneurysm. Very clean, very untraceable." "You always were the brightest of us," Morgan replied, almost fondly. "Yes, this will be much cleaner than poison. No human janitor will be able to save you this time. You were behind the assassination attempt." "I was behind all 3 attempts," Morgan confirmed casually. "Though I must admit, I underestimated your pet human's medical knowledge. That was an unexpected complication." Marcus activated his emergency communicator, sending a silent signal to Captain Kexvar and the security team. But even at their fastest response time, they would be too late to prevent whatever Morgan was planning. "Why?" Zeftar asked. "We are brothers. We grew up together, trained together, shared the same dreams of glory for the Empire." "Because your dreams are nightmares," Morgan snarled, his composed facade cracking. "You speak of cooperation with inferior species, of partnership instead of domination. Do you have any idea what the Empire would become under your rule? Weak, soft, vulnerable to every enemy who sees kindness as an opportunity for attack?" The neural disruptor was beginning to glow more brightly, its crystalline structure focusing energy into a coherent beam. Marcus realized with horror that he was about to watch Prince Zeftar die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it from his position in the maintenance shaft. "The Empire was built on strength," Morgan continued, rising from his chair, "on the understanding that we are superior to every other species in the galaxy. Your philosophy would undo 1,000 years of conquest and expansion." "Maybe it needs to be undone," Zeftar replied quietly. "Maybe strength isn't measured in how many worlds you can conquer, but in how many allies you can inspire. Weakness, Morgan spat. And now that weakness ends. He raised the neural disruptor, pointing it directly at his brother's head. The device hummed with lethal energy, ready to discharge a beam that would kill Zeftar instantly while leaving no evidence of foul play. That was when Marcus kicked out the maintenance grating and dropped into the chamber. His landing was less than graceful. He hit the crystal floor hard and rolled to absorb the impact, but his sudden appearance had the desired effect. Morgan spun toward the unexpected intrusion, the neural disruptor swinging away from its target. "The pet human," Morgan said with disgust. "How did you—" Marcus didn't give him time to finish the question. In the weeks since becoming Zeftar's bodyguard, he had undergone intensive training in draconian combat techniques. He wasn't nearly as strong or fast as a natural predator, but he had learned to use his smaller size and different movement patterns as advantages. He rolled under Morgan's swing, came up inside the Crown Prince's reach, and drove his elbow into the draconian's solar plexus. The blow wouldn't have seriously injured Morgan, but it surprised him enough to disrupt his aim. The neural disruptor fired, but its beam went wide, striking the crystal wall and leaving a scorch mark that glowed with residual energy. "Brother, run!" Marcus shouted, grappling with Morgan for control of the weapon. "Get security!" But Zeftar didn't run. Instead, he moved to help, grabbing a ceremonial artifact from the table and swinging it at Morgan's head. The blow connected with a sound like breaking glass, and the Crown Prince staggered backward. "You would side with an alien against your own family?" Morgan roared, blood seeping from a cut on his scaled forehead. "I side with someone who risked everything to save my life," Zeftar replied firmly. "Something my own brother apparently was never willing to do." Morgan raised the neural disruptor again, but before he could fire, the chamber doors burst open. Captain Kexvar and a full security team poured into the room, their weapons drawn and ready. "Stand down," the captain commanded. "Lower your weapon immediately." For a moment, Marcus thought Morgan might comply. The Crown Prince looked around the room, taking in the security team, his injured brother, and the human who had disrupted his carefully planned assassination. Then his expression hardened into something that might have been resolve or desperation. "The Empire will not survive his weakness," he said, turning the neural disruptor toward his own head. "Better to die as a true draconian than live to see everything we built collapse." "Don't!" Zeftar lunged forward, but he was too late. The neural disruptor discharged with a sound like tearing silk. Prince Morgan, Crown Prince and heir to the Dragon Throne, collapsed to the crystal floor, his dark scales already fading to gray. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the humming of the palace machinery seemed muted, as if the building itself was in shock. Marcus slowly climbed to his feet, his body aching from the brief but intense struggle. "Is he dead?" Zeftar asked quietly. Captain Kexvar knelt beside the fallen prince, checking for vital signs with professional efficiency. After a moment, he looked up and nodded grimly. "Neural disruptor at close range," he reported. Death was instantaneous. Zeftar sank into his chair, the weight of what had just occurred settling on him like a physical burden. "He was my brother. We played together as children, studied together as young adults. I never imagined he could hate me enough to kill me." "He didn't hate you," Marcus said gently. "He was afraid of what you represent. Change is terrifying to people who have built their entire identity around maintaining the status quo. And now," Zeftar looked up at him with haunted eyes, "what happens to the Empire now? Morgan was the designated heir. Velthor is away on diplomatic missions and may not return for months. The succession laws aren't clear about this situation." "Now you become what you were always meant to be," Marcus replied. "A leader who makes decisions based on what's right rather than what's traditional." Over the following hours, the palace erupted into controlled chaos. The news of Prince Morgan's death sent shockwaves through the imperial court, with various factions immediately beginning to maneuver for advantage. Emergency sessions of the Imperial Council were called. Diplomatic messages flew between star systems, and security forces went to maximum alert. Through it all, Marcus stayed close to Prince Zeftar, watching for signs of additional threats. The exposure of Morgan as a would-be assassin had answered the question of who was trying to kill the prince, but it had also created new uncertainties. Who else might have been involved in the conspiracy? What other dangers might emerge from the succession crisis? 3 days later, Emperor Draxthul himself summoned both Prince Zeftar and Marcus to the throne room. The emperor was ancient by draconian standards, his golden scales dulled with age, but his presence still commanding absolute authority. The throne room itself was a cathedral of crystal and metal designed to inspire awe and submission in all who entered. "My son is dead," the emperor said without preamble, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "My heir, trained from birth to rule an empire, killed himself rather than face justice for trying to murder his own brother." Marcus and Zeftar knelt in the traditional position of respect, but the emperor gestured for them to rise. "Tell me, human," the emperor continued, focusing his ancient eyes on Marcus, "why did my son die?" The question was clearly a test, and Marcus knew that his answer could determine not only his own fate, but the future direction of the empire. "Your son died because he couldn't imagine a different kind of strength," Marcus replied carefully. "He saw the empire as something that could only exist through domination and fear. When faced with the possibility of change, he chose death over adaptation." "And you believe adaptation is necessary?" Marcus glanced at Prince Zeftar, then back at the emperor. "I believe that strength without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. The Draconian Empire is powerful enough to conquer any enemy it faces. The question is whether it's wise enough to know when conquest isn't the answer." Emperor Draxthul was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving between Marcus and his remaining son. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. "Prince Zeftar, you are hereby named Crown Prince and heir to the Dragon Throne. Your first official act will be to establish new protocols for cooperation with non-draconian species within the Empire." He turned to Marcus. "And you, human, will serve as special advisor for interspecies relations. It seems that my empire has much to learn about the value of different perspectives." As they left the throne room, Marcus felt the enormity of what had just occurred. In the space of a few months, he had gone from being an invisible janitor to becoming one of the most influential beings in galactic politics. "Are you ready for this?" he asked Prince Zeftar as they walked through corridors that would soon be his to command. "I'm terrified," the prince admitted, "but I'm also hopeful. For the first time in my life, I feel like real change might be possible. It won't be easy. There will be resistance, probably violence. A lot of people have invested everything in the old ways. Then we'll show them that the new ways can be stronger." Prince Zeftar smiled, and Marcus was struck by how much the young Draconian had changed since that day in the study room. The naive academic was gone, replaced by someone who had faced death and betrayal and emerged with his principles intact. "Besides," the prince continued, "I'll have the best bodyguard in the galaxy watching my back." As they reached the prince's chambers, soon to be the crown prince's chambers, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He had saved a dying alien out of simple human decency, and in doing so had helped reshape the future of an empire. Maybe that was what the galaxy really needed, not grand gestures or revolutionary speeches, but simple acts of courage performed by ordinary people who refused to let circumstances define their choices. The Draconian Empire was about to learn what humans had always known, that real strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the willingness to build something better. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the empire, other human janitors and maintenance workers and laborers were looking up at the news broadcasts and realizing that maybe, just maybe, their own small acts of decency might matter more than they had ever imagined. The age of human servitude was ending. The age of human partnership was about to begin. And it had all started with a janitor who refused to let someone die on his watch.